All right, that took a little while, but we made it. All right, so welcome everybody who's watching here and then later the replay. Welcome to the community. And as I've said, in terms of the Facebook group, I really wanted to grow and become organic. So I'm going to put in regular in terms of posts that are a combination of knowledge, but motivation, inspiration, things to think about. And then the backbone that I really wanted to do was a regular contact every 2 weeks to present something. And this obviously today is the elimination diet, and then to take it in what areas especially people are interested in. So all of you have heard my talks at various centers. And so there's a big range, whether we in the future talking about hormones, talking specifics in terms of nutrition, mindset, just different aspects. So always welcome to leave some feedback, and we'll send it in the directions that really support people. So kicking off, and I started with the elimination diet because it's something personal, not only for me, but for, we might say 50% of the population. So I'm going to go into today, what is the problem? I'm going to talk about 10 triggers. I'm going to talk about elimination diets and the possibilities. For me, looking at different possibilities. Then I'm going to go through the common questions that that people have generally had when I've worked with them on this. And funny enough, just it must be 3 hours ago, I worked with a person on an elimination diet. A young lady who's had a lot of gut issues, what I see malnutrition, very low B12, very low iron, low in terms of nutrients, and I see that really common. And then the person says, "I don't get it. I eat red meat, Craig. I eat meat. Like, how can I be low in these nutrients?" And it's very clear. It's not just what you eat; it's what you absorb, what you assimilate. So this is in terms of the diet, and we start off. I'll often come back to this when it comes to functional medicine. When I'm working with a person, I'm looking at three main things. I'm basically trying to strip back from a symptom-based model to find out what is the root cause. And the root, generally, I'll be looking at cells. And the cells have three main needs. And many of you have heard this, but for those who haven't, I'll repeat it. The cell's first needs are fuel and nutrients, which is why I often work on blood sugar to start. And we're going to talk about blood sugar in future weeks, but I often talk about the importance of blood sugar, having a constant fuel source, whether it is what you eat and also what your body uses as fuel. Now, if we've got constant fuel, but we lack nutrients like B12 or iron, as this lady did today, or we lack enough magnesium or zinc, then the cell doesn't operate correctly. And then we have it, if it's not working, things break down and the cells make the tissues that make the organs. So suddenly there might be a hormonal issue with insulin or one of the sex hormones. And that then has an effect, a knock-on. So fuel and nutrients is number one. And what the gut absorbs directly influences this. And that's why it's so important for me. The ability to remove wastes. So the body is constantly, cells are constantly producing these metabolic products like carbon dioxide and toxins. And if we don't remove them, we're getting into an acidity and an inflammatory issue. And I always say blood sugar and inflammation, they're the two biggest things that I'm looking at today. And we're looking at from a cellular level. If there's an issue there, then obviously that will affect the whole organism, affect us. Third one is the pH. If we don't have the right pH for each of the cell, enzymes don't work, and that means things don't get done. Metabolic things, clearing things, but basically the cell doesn't work. So if we can think that in mind, when we go into this elimination diet, then and always kind of referring back to it, how are the cells working, then we can get and understand what is optimal. How do we optimize cellular function, which means that we function at our optimal. So this is the reason why I started with it, because if there's, say, in terms of the group, there's 50 somewhat people who hopefully everyone's get a chance to watch this video now and then. In terms of the recording, nearly half the people will have a gut issue, and that could be irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. It could be jumping between constipation, diarrhea, or having constant It could be reflux every time you eat. It could be frequently having bloating, gas, nausea, vomiting. Now, that's what, in terms of this study, they looked at about 73,000 people and saying that 40% people at that time had one of these. And that's a lot. And if we think about that, if that means the gut is having problems, that means you're not absorbing your nutrients. And that first thing about the cell, fuel, and nutrients has a problem. And no wonder we have nutrition issues, malnutrition. And as I say, you can be overweight and malnourished. We used to have this idea, oh, that person is overweight. They must, like, they've got too much. Maybe in terms of their body isn't using the fuel, but oftentimes, as I've seen, they're lacking nutrients that allow their metabolism to work. So that's our big problem. So, okay, so we've got a gut problem, nearly half the people. What is the connection with food? There's a lot of studies out there, but this one I just picked out, which basically showed, or in their study, that 85–90% of people with just IBS, that irritable bowel, there's a reaction from foods. Things get worse and is connected with food. And this is what changed me. Many of you know my story, that I went from a sports science, I studied sports science psychology at university, went into more training, movement, corrective movement, massage therapy, all the physical parts. And then I had a gut problem. And so one of the biggest tools that I used to help my gut was an elimination diet, being introduced and realizing, oh, actually, food, to go down a deeper level, directly affects how I feel, and obviously it was causing a lot of other problems. So we're seeing a very strong connection, and that's where some of these diets can be really amazing in terms of, I know in my case, how it changes from mentally feeling, some people, not only the gut problems, but brain fog, mental issues. We're even seeing very strong connections with depression and having inflammatory bowel disease. So there's a strong, like, the gut is the second brain. And in terms of the nerves, there's more than in terms of the brain. So there has an intelligence. So that's the background. Why are we doing this? Because it affects a lot of people. And the food has a direct relationship in how the gut functions. And that's why it's that important. So I want to get, like, in terms of these talks, really get to the nuts and bolts of things and make it to the point. And out of all, so I looked at studies. I also asked myself, so this list here of the top 10, there's what I see and what the studies basically suggest we have sensitivities to. Now, before I get into it, we have allergies. I want to be clear. We have food allergies, which is a very strong immune reaction. And most people will know them by an early age. Oh, I'm allergic to peanuts. Oh, I'm allergic to shellfish. I break out. I have very strong reactions. What we're talking a lot are sensitivities. And the girl I spoke to today, she already knew herself eggs. So out of this list, eggs, dairy, and she felt eggs, dairy, and then it was a vegetable, spinach. And she said, every time I have them, I feel like I have a flu, cold flu-like reaction. I get, like, my immune system kicks in and those. And she didn't think potentially that was causing that much of an issue. But because of that, her B12 was super low. Iron was low. And so her gut, especially what we call the microvilli that absorb the nutrients, they weren't able to take in those nutrients. So she became deficient, which causes a problem. So I'll take you through the list. I've broken down in the next slides the three that really I find either people don't maybe know about, but the first two are very common, and so I'll go through. The third one, less. But food additives. No matter when I'm with a person and we're talking about elimination, I'm always trying to say, can we reduce, and this is, we'll talk especially at the end, whether to reduce or eliminate, but can we take out as much processed food as possible? It's very clear. Processed food is full of things that the body and the gut are not appreciating. They're not designed over the millions of years to take in the levels of the types of preservatives, those artificial colorings, flavorings, preservatives. And though MSG is in some foods, the amount that people have is just their body can't handle. So the first thing I usually say is, can a person start with the cleanest diet? That's an elimination diet. Can you reduce the amount of refined processed sugars, bad vegetable oils, things that are long preservatives, things that have a long shelf life? And that's a pretty standard. But then we go into gluten, and I'm going to go into a little bit of detail there. We go to dairy. They're two of the biggest. When I do testing, some people choose to do what's called an IgG test. So we have IgA, which is the allergy. The IgG is the sensitivity. It basically means the immune system produces these types of antibodies to say something's not right. They are expensive. So some clients will opt in, and for here in Thailand, they're about 15,000 baht. I often prefer just going into an elimination diet, but gluten and dairy nearly always come up. And especially when we talk about just regular milk and in terms of wheat. Eggs are often in the case. And the part of the problem, which really is unfortunate, because the egg is so perfect. It's such an amazing food. And I want people to eat eggs. Has so many fat-soluble vitamins, has good protein, has solid fats. But the problem is, especially the white, the protein part, has a lot of allergens, and that causes a reaction. And so my rule with eggs, if you don't have a reaction to it, awesome, but please don't eat eggs every day. Please have at least 2 days, 2 consecutive days off eggs per week. I did a post in the Facebook group about a medical student, a Harvard medical student, who ate the 30-something or just ate a massive amount of eggs, and his cholesterol went down. And I talked about that cholesterol isn't there's a lot more to in terms of heart disease and also what affects cholesterol than simply eating high cholesterol foods. But too many eggs, it's not about the saturated fat, in my opinion. They are good fats. It's just the problem of being constantly having in your system. So I like a couple of days off per week. Beans and legumes, they have these things called lectins in them. And I talk about the difference between plants and animals. The plant has defense mechanisms to protect against, so natural pesticides, natural fungicides, natural things to stop that bug from biting it, eating it. And so in the case of beans and legumes, and especially soy, which is also mostly GMO, so genetically modified, to try to prevent these issues with bugs, they basically have a lot of what's called lectins. So the ancestors knew that. They soak them, they cook them thoroughly, and by cooking them thoroughly, they reduce the amount of lectins. Now, for some people, that's fine. We can handle some. It's just if a person has a gut issue, they feel constantly, oh, I feel like I'm bloated, I feel like those symptoms, then taking some time off and then reintroducing them can be beneficial, just to give the gut a time to reduce the inflammation and then also heal. And then a person can become more specific. So when you take a food out for a period of time, suddenly you create a level playing field. And when you reintroduce it, the body says, oh, actually, I had a problem with that. I see that really often, especially when people take, I'm going to go 30 days off wheat or something. And then they have that bread and they go, I grew up with wheat and now it suddenly affects me. And that's because your body has now gained the natural sensitivity. Corn, similar to the beans and legumes, a lot of GMO today, and also in terms of a lot of mold, but a lot of people affected also. Nuts and seeds, like the beans and legumes, they have these anti-nutrients, and we have that saying, a tough nut. They need to be soaked, they need to be prepared. The seeds ideally would be even slightly sprouted, because for the gut, it takes a bit to digest them. A lot of them have great fats, good protein in terms of fiber, nutrients. So there's many benefits, like Brazil nuts with all the selenium and in terms of almonds. The only issue is if a person's got those gut issues, they can be reacting to it. So often taking them out for a period can be beneficial if they think that's the case. But otherwise, trying to at least soak them and we would say activate them. Number 8, the nightshades. Tomatoes, potatoes, eggplants. Tomatoes, some people will notice raw, big problem. Cooked, not as much an issue. And actually when a tomato is cooked, nutrients like lycopene, which has some anti-cancer benefits, actually increase. So we have to watch out. And potatoes, when they're green, have more problems. But this nightshade family does cause some people, and especially if I have someone who's got joint pains, a lot of joint pains, because these nightshades, like when I get to the oxalates, they cause or are related to a lot of joint issues. The next one I'm going to talk a little bit in detail. It's called FODMAPs, and they are basically fermentable sugars. And I'll go into that when we get there. But if a person, and often when a person has a gut problem, they have an overgrowth of bacteria or fungi. And these bacteria and fungi will feed on the sugars and cause these problems. And often they'll cause diarrhea, straight away bloating, gas, those sort of issues. So it's important to kind of recognize, and I'll talk later about the fermentation process, why it's important to maybe have more fermented before versus fermenting inside the body, but I'll get to that one. Number 10, the oxalates. Spinach has great nutrients in there, but for a lot of people, if they take too many of these oxalates, rhubarb, even sweet potatoes, then these oxalates are like oxalic acid crystals, and these crystals can affect the gut. They can cause some inflammation. They can cause some joint problems, and we just have to be careful. I learned this from a lady, Sally Fallon, who used to, that was her problem, and she wrote a book about superfood, problems with superfoods, and obviously spinach, kale, rhubarb, all these are considered superfoods. And she had so much, but as a kid, she would have rhubarb pie all the time. They had a veggie garden, and she would have rhubarb and made rhubarb pie. And it caused massive joint problems. And as soon as she took it out, she had a lot of problems, first of all, because of getting the oxalates out. But joint pain went, and her gut pain stopped. So they're the top 10. There are, in terms of nuances, but these are the ones that I see most of the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the 3 that I kind of pointed out, because I see these like in most people, especially who obviously having a gut issue. So gluten. Gluten is the protein in these grains, and the grains I've listed to the side: barley, bulgur, kamut. So you can have a look at that. Wheat is the biggest one, and the problem we have is the modern wheat has been hybridized, which causes some people some issues. And so there's a few reasons why, if a person has a gut problem, going gluten-free is something I always say, can we just test that? If we don't do anything else, but can we have a go with gluten-free? So obviously, if they have a non-sensitivity, then they should choose it. But anyone with a thyroid autoimmune condition like Hashimoto really needs to be careful, and ideally even get rid of gluten. It's so well known in the functional medicine world that gluten really gets the immune system stirred up and creates a lot of these autoimmune reactions. It mimics in terms of the thyroid, and basically autoimmune is the thyroid. The body is attacking itself. It's attacking its thyroid. The other thing, and I learned this firsthand, having worked in the wheat belt, which is it's a massive strip in Western Australia, like the size of half of Western Europe. And when I worked on the wheat belt, they would have to test each of the grains, and they'd put 10 in, and I often tell this story, and they go through. And if there's less than 3 moldy ones, it's like human consumption. 5, then animals can have it, and if it's more than 5, they have to dump it. And the problem that we see is they would often argue about it, and say, you'd have the driver saying that's not mold, and so there's a lot of mold that's potentially getting into wheat. We also have the issue in countries, particularly the US, but other countries in terms of Australia, I think, is doing it too, where they use Roundup, a pesticide glyphosate. And they don't use it to kill the bugs. They use it for the harvest because it dries the wheat. So they're so fearful before the rain comes that will cause the mold that they will spray it. It will kill the plant, dry the wheat, and then they can use it. And this is why a lot of people, they may come from the States or Australia and they're having bread and it's a real problem. And then they get to Italy and they say, I had bread and I had things in Italy and it wasn't a problem at all. And that's part because the type, how the grain is, which grains they use, and if they spray, and how the grain gets looked after, and whether it's because it's not a hybrid. So for me, if there is, in terms of an inflammatory issue, an autoimmune issue, then gluten is one of the first that I say, because there's a lot of substitutes out there, and it's very common nowadays for people to take a break from it. That's number one. No. Number two is
yeah, it's just gone a bit weird in a minute.
Frozen. I'm coming back. I can see me, but it's frozen.
Yeah, you're back, I think.
Internet, a little bit funny. Yeah,
you're okay now.
See if that helps the internet. All right. Hopefully that works. My internet's downstairs, so hopefully we're back into it. But in terms, okay, back into it. Sorry about that. You guys see me okay? Can you hear me? Back in there? Awesome. All right, so dairy. Now, off the bat, I'm not a fan of pasteurized commercial milk in the supermarket. The process destroys the good bacteria. And when it comes to dairy, I'm very big on fermented dairy for those who can have it. I think the studies are very clear, the kefirs, the Greek yogurts, the natural yogurts, having those good bacteria, very beneficial for those without issues. But simple milk, most people have lost that ability. They're not producing the lactase, the enzyme to break it down after childhood and then from an animal. So if you're going to choose dairy, ideally it is fermented. But the problems I see, people are in terms of the lactose issue or the protein, the casein issue. What I see most often is when people are having sinus issues, mucus issues, they feel like they have it and they're constantly having a mucus issue. Their skin will change, and obviously hormonally, especially if the dairy products were affected by hormones. Pardon me, the cow's getting hormones, and it causes a problem. Known a few cases where young girls, I once had a girl from Mexico who started maturing at 8, and they believe that it was because of all the animal and the dairy. She had a lot of dairy and what the cows were given. So it caused a lot of problems, including polycystic ovarian syndrome and issues with her menstrual cycle. So for me, dairy is kind of, be very careful if you have, in terms of sinus issues, inflammatory issues, any eczema, psoriasis, I'm like, try to just go like 30 days, and we'll talk about duration and things, without the dairy. And when you bring it back in, try to make it the fermented and ideally organic, grass-fed, to not have those hormones. So the third one I'm going to talk about is the FODMAPs. Now, it stands for fermentable oligo and di mono and these type of saccharides. Now, they're basically sugars, carbohydrate sugars, and you can see that. So the fructanes, onions and garlic are classic. So if anyone feels like every time I eat onions and garlic, I get this like bloating, I get diarrhea, because often these FODMAPs, the bacteria, what we call small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So people having especially too many bacteria in their small intestine. We should have most in the colon, okay, the large intestine. But if there's a lot in the small intestine, they'll feed on, and they feed on sugar. They're creating like basically they're burping inside you and you feel this gas building up, and then the body also can often get rid of it with diarrhea. So if you're reacting to onions and garlic, there's a chance that you have too many bacteria in the small intestine and they need to be starved. Lentils, chickpeas in terms of another type, so the galacto, lactose, obviously those milk sugars, fructose can be an issue for some, and then the sugar alcohols. So what happens is when we have these foods, they ferment in our gut, in our small intestine, and that causes an array of problems. So what I am and what I'll talk about is the importance of having already pre-fermented foods. And I really like people having, if they're okay, a small portion at each meal. Maybe there's some sauerkraut, maybe there's some kimchi, or if you don't have a problem with the dairy, then having some sort of yogurt or kefir. But right sitting next to me is some kombucha. So regularly having kombucha, but fermented food is really important for the microbiome. All right, so let's talk about possibilities. When I had my gut problem a long time, nearly 20 years ago, I was recommended to go on a modified paleo style diet. Many of you know this already. I talk about this. I've been on a modified paleo diet for the last 20 years. And basically it is what we hunt and what we gather. So the image will show, so obviously meats, fish, seafood, eggs, fruits, below ground vegetables, fats and oils, nuts and seeds, okay? That's the basis of a paleo style diet. What's out is the newer agricultural foods from the grains, the legumes, but then also the processed food, obviously trying to, in terms of elimination of them, and our newfangled vegetable oils, which should be called a refined seed oil. What I'm going to do, I'm going to have some in the resources in the Facebook, I'm going to put a modified paleo. Some of you may have tried it with me, but I'm going to put that in the resources and you can see what sort of foods. I found this incredible. Like it really made such a difference. And just the reduction of certain foods, like for me, the reaction with gluten, now knowing in terms of my severe reaction with gluten. But for some people, it's a good in-between. So I'm going to kind of start here and go to things that are potentially a bit more strict. But a lot of people who wanted to explore the elimination diet, now, of course, you could say, well, I'm going to stay away from gluten or dairy. This is just a slight extension. What I love is when people try to choose farmers markets and get some things, the foods that are local, that are seasonal, that are free range, grass-fed, and just as close to their natural state. But the premise was this diet was actually discovered, or not discovered, but looked at and used by a guy called Dr. Laurent Cordain in relation to inflammatory issues and particularly asthma. And he saw such a difference with the asthmatics who tried this. There was less inflammation, which caused them in terms of needing less medication like Ventolins and reactions. Skin reactions, noticed a big difference. So that's the kind of a potential starting point. But then I know for myself, I moved a little bit into what we call a paleo autoimmune protocol. Now you can see it's like, oh, okay. So we got rid of the processed foods. We got rid of the grains, the breads. We got rid of the beans and legumes. We cleaned up the diet. And a person might say, but I still don't feel so well. I had a conversation with a young man. It was actually yesterday. And he had gut problems and he did gluten-free, dairy-free. He only did it for 2 weeks, but he didn't really notice a difference. And so the suggestion was we're exploring this and the next option, because for some people it might have been those FODMAPs. So in the paleo diet, you can have fruit. It's all open in terms of vegetables. So there's no problem with like people have rhubarb or sweet potatoes, but some people may still be affected. So this is a next step. What I'm doing in the resources is I've actually got a list and also a sample 7-day kind of meal plan if someone decided they wanted to explore it, okay? So I'll put something after today on the paleo, what I call a modified paleo diet that's a kind of a worksheet. And the next version is a little stricter, as you can see, so eggs, nuts, and seeds, but especially for those who suffer from strong autoimmune conditions, including Hashimoto's, but obviously celiac disease is a big one. So any of the also inflammatory, like the colitis, any digestive inflammatory, this can be very helpful. And things like rheumatoid arthritis too, which is really kicking in. I'm seeing more and more today where they're having an inflammatory, strong inflammatory response, not just the regular mechanical arthritis where the joint is wearing down. This is the immune system causing a lot of pain and discomfort. So this, taking some of these, like I said, the nightshade, taking that group out, like the tomatoes, the peppers, and potatoes, can really benefit some people. So that's kind of, so we're now going from a paleo, or we individually, or a person might say, hey, I'll take out the gluten and the dairy, I'll see, or I'm going to eat clean. To a person saying, I think I want to explore a bit more. I ate clean, I took out those, I didn't get a difference. Okay, so to the paleo, now to the autoimmune paleo version, to what would be considered the strictest of elimination diets, carnivore. Now, 20 years ago, even though like in terms of a paleo, I would have thought, oh, there's no vegetables in there. That can't be good. What about the microbiome? What's going to happen to them? So there was all these things. And then over especially the last 10, but even the last 5 years, the amount of people from anecdotally that I know to from a research perspective who have had severe gut problems and moved to a very strong carnivore diet, and their benefits have been quite, incredible. And it's something that I've tried myself. I am on a meat-based diet, and it works right for me. A lot of you know my story that I was in terms of had a period of vegetarianism when I was in Australia, and it really wasn't good for me. But the carnivore diet is basically the bare bones. Now, they get this idea, and same as the girl today said, but isn't red meat like bad for you? It doesn't red meat with the saturated fats. And I know, Marie, you the same thing. Many people we have as nutritionists, like really, or in terms of the instructions saying red meat, high saturated fat, gives you a heart attack, increases cancer, does all these bad things. And then we get studies come out of like Hong Kong having the highest level of red meat and the lowest level of these heart disease and that. We go to another country and look at their data. And we go, and then we think about evolutionary, what we kind of were raised on, what sort of products. And then we look at in terms of even now with slowly more studies are coming up from the carnivore. Harvard actually released one recently, didn't want to release, there's all this kind of thing. They didn't want to let it go or put it out there because it went against their philosophy, but showed that the responses, the positive responses from people, especially those who suffer from gut issues, immune system issues, autoimmune issues, who benefited from a carnivore diet was astonishing. And a lot of the guys that I followed when I was doing the paleo diet, like Rob Wolf and there's a few others who slowly moved more in this direction too. A lot of them, like me, had some autoimmune, had some immune system issues, and they noticed, wow, when I really stripped it back, I felt better. Now, there are caveats to this style too. The absolute extreme, what some would call the lion diet, especially Michaela Pitts and Jordan Peterson, that psychologist, his daughter who had massive immune system issues, she just ate beef and lamb. There is a Dr. Anthony Chafee, American doctor out of Perth, a surgeon, and Dr. Sean Baker, both Americans, who have been on this style of eating for 10 plus years, doing their bloods and helping transform a lot of people. This is the absolute extreme though, where they'll say it's especially beef salt, and water. And for a lot of people, though, it's just unrealistic. For if a person has serious autoimmune, serious gut issues, for doing it for a period of time can be beneficial. But what I don't want to do oftentimes is see that a person is it's just overwhelming. So very rarely do I, unless I do have some clients and they've gone straight into carnivore because they have such issues and they've seen such benefits. But basically, in my opinion, it can be used as an elimination where, there are many who that's their lifestyle, but then we reintroduce things. And so one of the things for my mind was looking at the carnivore diet and then reintroducing certain plants and seeing, am I having a reaction? And even looking at when you reintroduce the fermented foods like the sauerkrauts or coconut kefir or even some of the dairy, the benefits on the microbiome. Some of the problems that people talk about with the carnivore is the potential that it will reduce the diversity of the microbiome. It does change the microbiome. There's a lot of different discussions, but if anyone's doing carnivore long-term, I am of the belief that I think it's beneficial to have at least some fermented foods in there, see the reaction. But I've seen some amazing things, amazing success stories. But again, it's for the amount of people who are willing to do this because socially, from even just, I'm eating the same meal, I'm eating another steak, I'm eating another, it can be mentally also not so nice. So having a range, what I wanted to show you guys today to say, okay, number one, try to eat clean. If you've got these gut problems, go with clean first. Then stepping stones, maybe a paleo diet could be helpful. Okay, still not feeling anything. Maybe going to autoimmune because some of the foods still in the paleo can be affecting you. If that's not working and you're really still suffering, your joints are still hurting, and that was Dr. Sean Baker. He went on to it because his joints, I think he's late 50s and he noticed, and he trains a lot. He's got these records in different activities or whatever, but he noticed his joints were just suffering. And he decided, he'd heard from somebody that it was that it reduced the inflammation. And so he tried it and he's been on it ever since. And that's where for him, it was a joint issue. It depends on the person, obviously, in terms of going into it. All right. So I'm going to go into the common questions that I see, and then you guys can ask questions and we'll go from there. So where to start? As I said, first it's asking, what's my goal? Why would I take certain foods out of my diet that could be beneficial? So the obvious is, okay, refined sugar, processed foods and all that, they negate, they take things away from the body. They hurt the cells. That's obvious. But are there any benefits to sourdough rye bread? Sure. There's some benefits to it. Absolutely. Are there benefits in terms of dairy products? Yeah, absolutely. There's some benefits to it. Or even like nuts and seeds. Absolutely. If they're prepared and your body digests it, there's some nutrient density in terms of, we talk about fiber, things like that. So there are benefits. So you want to look and say, I'm doing this with this in mind. When I work, and most of you know this, when I'm working, I love to see blood tests and I love to see before and after. Especially I work on 3 months. I find you need at least 3 months to see a difference. But if you are eliminating things, the hope would be doing it not in a few days or even a week. Generally 30 days is the amount of time to take something out to notice a difference. Body takes time to reduce the inflammation and look at the sensitivity. So know why you're doing it, and also ask yourself, do I have any suspicions? A lot of people, like the girl today, she knew exactly eggs were a problem, and in terms of dairy was a problem, and spinach, she knew it was on the list. So those who filled out my questionnaire, there's, do you think you're intolerant? Do you think you have problems with foods? Because I want to hear what you have to say. You're having to deal with it. So trust your gut. It's really important, like the gut, trust it. Do I think this is causing a problem? And then saying how, like if I'm going to take it out, how would I approach this? And that's why I want to give some examples in the resources in the Facebook group so you can have a look at it. The next question is, well, do I eliminate it completely or just reduce it? Now, sometimes from a social situation, it's like, oh, I've got this coming up and I'd like to improve, but I maybe just trying to reduce it at the start. Like, for instance, some people, if they were eating eggs every day, I might say, well, just see what happens if you don't eat them every day. See what effect. Same as having the bread or something. If you don't want to go in terms of fully strict, maybe just reduce it. I'd love people to reduce as much fake food as possible. But these whole foods, see how you go if maybe you reduce it. But a person says, I'm not getting better. It's like, maybe we need to take it out for 30 days. So how long? So that next question. Generally, I like a 30-day period, but some will need 3 months. Like for me, it's a lifestyle. I haven't had consciously gluten for so long because I know it's been unconscious. Like accidentally comes in, and I know it's hurting. So for me, it's just my lifestyle now. I know that I'm on towards that modified paleo autoimmune meat-based diet. It just works. I feel best. I've got most energy. My gut feels the best, and so I'm happy with it. So even if my kids say, do you know what, like we're having pizza and all this, I'm like, enjoy. I'm not going to partake. Not worth it. Next question I have often is, what about supplements, Craig? Should I be taking supplements? Well, if you're simply just reducing a food, removing it, hopefully there'll be other foods that will make up the nutrient density. And what we know from nutrient density is actually the animal products are the highest in nutrient density. So spinach has iron, but it's nowhere near the amount that red meat would have. And in terms of obviously animal products having B12 and certain B vitamins, folate can come from some vegetables, so hopefully like salads. But what I might say is if you're concerned, take a whole supplement, like a whole multivitamin for a period of time, just to cover any bases if you're concerned. I often also say a lot of these plans involve reducing carbohydrates, because there goes my bread, there goes my pasta, there goes my potatoes, there goes all that. And so what I say is please keep the salt up. You can take an electrolyte, but keep the salt high, because you lose salt when you lose the stores of carbohydrates, the glycogen in your body. And a lot of people, especially if they do carnivore, if they're not having enough salt, they have a real issue. So getting enough salt is critical, and try to have it unrefined. If it's the French plain, okay, if it was the Himalayan, just trying to have it as natural, Celtic salt, those things. Other supplements, those on more of a meat-based diet, and for anybody, I'm actually a big fan of everyone taking some magnesium because of the effect on the body. Most people, especially the studies are very clear, women over 40, nearly all women are deficient in magnesium. We can get it from certain nuts and seeds, we can get it from some vegetables, but essentially it's a hard one to get. So I'm like, just supplement. If you take too much magnesium, generally you get in terms of diarrhea, and then which magnesium to take. In the Facebook group, I actually wrote about magnesium. I like magnesium, what we call bisglycinate or glycinate, and there's a link in the Facebook group to one version. How much? Often I'll say minimum, like start with 200 milligrams, but often 600 milligrams would be really helpful, especially at the end of the day. Other supplements that could be beneficial if someone has a bacterial or a fungal infection, the first job is to starve them, and that means reducing the carbohydrates. And that's why the classic anti-fungal diets were meat-based, low-carb, meaning get rid of the bread, get rid of the potatoes, get those. You want to starve them. Some people on top of that can take certain herbs. Berberine is good for blood sugar, but also in terms of infections. Kyolic garlic or aged garlic can help in terms of certain infections, bacterial or fungal. There's a few in terms of different styles of herbs, and also putting in for some people, they may take some probiotics for a period, but like I said, I like adding the fermented foods to have that. But of a beneficial yeast is called Saccharomycin, especially for those who had travelers' diarrhea, they had to take antibiotics. That's often given there. Should I keep a food diary? Absolutely. Just a booklet. When you start reintroducing foods, and generally after you've done this, you want to not reintroduce a food more than once every 3 days. And if you feel those reactions, you want to write it into a book. And you might have 3 columns. Column 1, problem. Column 2, not sure. Column 3, felt good when I introduced it. And so it's like, okay, I brought back certain vegetables or fruits. I didn't get bloating. I didn't get gas. And then suddenly you go, okay, well, today I'm going to try put the egg back, or I'll put the bread back. Okay. Try when you have it not to have too many foods around it. You're having that food with something that you already are pretty convinced that it feels good. So if you were having like you modified in terms of that paleo autoimmune protocol, and you thought, okay, well, let me have a look what happens in terms of breakfast. I might have had, and people often, breakfast is the funny one. People are like, oh, if I can't have the bread or the cereal, what do I have? I can't have eggs now. What do I have if I've got no breakfast for eggs? And I'm like, some mornings I like a piece of steak. Some people have like salmon for breakfast. Some people will have in terms of different, but I'm very big on protein for breakfast, protein and good fats. And then it's like, say if you did have that piece and you wanted to then say it was a piece of salmon, then you're like, okay, I want to see how this sourdough rye affects it. All right, you know you're good with the salmon. You have just that piece of rye. You may have also tried in terms of butter. Say, yeah, I was fine. I had some on the salmon, and then reintroducing one at a time. But use that food diary. Think about those lists. So in terms of symptoms that you should monitor, what were the reasons that you thought there was an issue? What's going on with your gut? Be clear, write them down, and you can even give them a scale. And one of the issues maybe, I get super tired after eating. So if you get super tired, it's like, what's my energy level after eating? Maybe it was because of the carbohydrates, but maybe it's food sensitivities. Some people will know their blood pressure goes up after eating a food because now their blood, like it's inflammatory for them. So what are the issues surrounding the food that you thought, you know what, there might be something affecting me? And so as you bring it back, you say, is it sinus, immune system? Having a look at that. Organic versus conventional. If you can, try your best always to eat local, pasture raised. You want to call it organic. Sometimes it's organic, but it's not really like, it's not a good food just because it's organic. We're trying to get as close to what our grandparents and we were having 100 years ago before all the pesticides and chemicals and all that were happening. So if you have access to a farmer's market, go for it. But sometimes in terms of, we got to go with the conventional. So if it was, I'm not sure about this quality of meat, where that came from, sometimes we just need to try and see the reaction. Other causes of gut issues apart from food sensitivities. So this is where in terms of the food is a big part, but also is the bacteria. If a person is continually having issues, they've done the elimination diet, then generally what I recommend is looking at stool testing for the microbiome, or even things, there are infections like Helicobacter pylori that caused ulcers that got actually a Nobel Prize for the scientists, doctors who discovered it. But a lot of people are having gut issues because of infections. So if anyone wants to chat to me later in terms of the type of testing, but there are tests if you're in the UK, Australia, where they look at your stool and look at the microbiome. So it's basically microbiome testing can be helpful. They can pick up if there's parasites, fungal infections, bacterial overgrowths, and also inflammatory. So they can be really helpful. There's also hydrogen breath testing that can show if you've got what we call SIBO with too many, like I spoke, too many bacteria in the small intestine. They produce methane, they produce hydrogen gas that causes that discomfort. So we can do those in terms of a doctor can do that. And like I said, certain specific bacteria like Helicobacter. Last question on my list before I open it up is, do sensitivities last for life? Someone like me, I've accepted that these are the foods that I'm having, I feel better. But I've known many people, for instance, who've taken a break and then reintroduced foods, having healed the gut, reduces the infections, killed off the bacterial fungal infections, and suddenly now they can have a piece of sourdough rye, not a problem. They can have some fruit, not a problem, not getting bloating, feeding on it. They can have some dairy, fermented dairy, and not a problem. Their gut is able to take it, and the microbiome is good with that. The only way we're going to know is by going, obviously, through that process. So if I just wrap up now, and then I'll hand it over if you guys have any questions. But basically, the starting point for me is to ask, first of all, what is my goal? How do I feel? What am I trying to improve? Start with the most obvious, and then increase the potential in intensity, or the more elimination, so to speak. You want to always try to work with success. And if you feel like, oh my God, it's really creating a lot of anxiety by taking foods out, don't do it. We know now, like I'm going to do talks on cortisol. I'd rather not people having any anxiety. I'd rather them look at it and go, do you know what? I want to do this. I'm really excited to explore. And that's the mindset I'm really after. I want people to turn into like this biohacking scientist mode. I wonder what happens in my body if I take that food out for a period, versus this thing, I'm avoiding it. I'm scared of this food, and sets up what can happen with elimination diets. It can set up bad relationships with food, where a lot of fear. So where if there's fear, anxiety, I'm like, yeah, don't do that until you feel comfortable. Work on some other things. Maybe focus more on the blood sugar. Maybe focus just on clean diet. Do that first, and then you can come later. But really listening to the mind, and obviously respecting how you feel about that, but don't set yourself up for failure. That's my big tip. Give yourself also, if you're going to do this, give yourself some time to arrange the kitchen. So when you look at the research, you said, well, I'd like to take that out. Well, okay, what do you substitute with? And so that's what I've tried in those documents. But obviously, if you want to, in terms of having a post about that, let me know. But basically, you want to prepare and plan and prevent any anxiety or any problems that happen, so it's a smooth. Because cortisol, as most people who have heard me talk, is one of the biggest problems today. Stress in relation to food, in relation to everything, it causes inflammation and hurts the gut. Is one of the reasons a lot of people have gut problems, because of stress. So I don't want to create more stress. So I want to be very clear for that. I want a person to come in to an elimination diet. Like, I mean, I came in and was like, okay, let's see what this is like. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. Like having that's really interesting. I'm curious about that. That's the mindset a person needs to have. If they have fear, I don't recommend going there, especially as strict. All righty. Talk for an hour. Thank you for listening. I'll hand it over to you guys if you have any questions regarding that. If I've missed anything or you want anything specific.